Your parents were too busy. Your education let you down. People told you culture wasn't for you. But you're not stupid, and this stuff's really interesting. Join us for some drinking and thinking about the best of 5,000 years of human civilization. After all, it belongs to you.
Hello.
That was unscripted. Hello.
Hello. Oh, I just thought I hadn't said anything yet.
Well, hello.
Hello.
So,
Good morning.
good morning, sir. Friends, thinkers, drinkers, lend me your ears. I have a dream that I can introduce you to a man who should need no introduction. A man whose exploits as a thinker are already well known to you. A man whose exploits as a drinker is the stuff of legends. He will drink on the beaches. He will drink in the pubs. He will drink in the fields and in the streets. He is a man who would share his last can of special brew with you as he rolled, covered in his own piss and vomit, in the gutter. I've seen him do it. He may have the body of a gouty, gammony old bastard, but he has the liver and the stomach of a king. And a king of England, too.
Salway.
Salway. Now, what are you drinking?
Okay, so breakfast wine from the hills of Rome, okay, and also with a chaser, a little bit of whiskey and soda.
A chotapeg. We are refreshing ourselves after quite a heavy night last night where we were podcasting about Roman poetry. So this is literally a breakfast of champions.
Quite literally.
We've got tucking into the cold Chinese with a nice fried egg on top, and we've also got, in honour of Cicero, who we're going to be talking about, whose name literally meant chickpea, we've got some nice hummus and toast. So we're sort of having a full English, full Chinese, I suppose.
Yeah, and we are literally having the breakfast. I mean, it is before work. This is an early morning podcast. We'll see if there's a difference. A little bit
We're
worried
not at
about
our
the fact
best in the mornings, I think you could say.
We've got the booze going, but
Yeah.
you know, we also have to do a full day's work later.
But I think with a breakfast like this to fortify us, I mean, this is good for morale, isn't it? This filling, well, it's sort of full Roman, really. And I've got a theory, a breakfast of champions theory, which is that all the great empires in human history are founded on breakfasts of champions.
Yeah.
So, you know, the reason why the Romans took over the whole of Europe and the Mediterranean and achieved more than any subsequent continental European empire is because they really took their breakfast seriously, those boys, right? As we're sort of discovering this morning. The British Empire, obviously, subsequently the greatest empire that the world has seen since Rome. The Americans haven't been doing too badly. We've got to credit them that for the last 100 years.
And they do a good breakfast.
And they do a damn good breakfast.
They put weird things
They
in
put
it.
weird shit in, but they do a good breakfast. Whereas there is nothing more dispiriting, you know, when you come downstairs in a hotel in Europe, to be presented with a cold buffet with sort of a few sweaty bits of cheese and some weird sausage.
I think
what the hell is that?
You expressed exactly the same sentiments when we were in a hotel. Where were we? Dresden.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately, of course, the chaps in Germany do speak English, and as you sort of went off on one about sweaty cheese, he gave you such a look.
He actually said something, didn't he?
He did say something, yeah. But you're right, there's nothing worse than, you know, sire, 'tis a continental breakfast.
Oh.
Will only take 20 minutes.
Oh, God.
No one likes that.
Any civilised breakfast needs to have hot food, eggs, meat, and alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, it's just not worth having a breakfast at all.
It's just not working. I mean, if you're going to go out and kick ass, you need that in your system.
Well, excellent. Kicking ass is actually what today's podcast is all about.
Well, indeed, yeah. So today we're going to be talking about rhetoric.
Yeah.
Now, for most of Western history, going all the way back to Greece and Rome, rhetoric was one of the main subjects that you would study at school. It was actually a third of the curriculum.
Yeah.
Sadly, this is now neglected. Some people don't even know what it is. Now, you used to be a teacher before that unfortunate scandal that we don't talk about.
Which we don't have to cut out references to.
Which we will cut out references to. I think I'm right in saying this is not now part of Key Stage 4, is it? You don't have double rhetoric after your double rhetoric.
We'll go, politics today is just people shouting at each other, etc., etc. Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course it is. It always has been.
It always has been. That is how we establish action.
If that's not the way politics run, then there's something that's gone badly wrong. You know, you only have to look at the Chinese parliament, and what it is rows of people all facing the same direction towards a raised dais where, you know, the chairman of the party is sitting and people just clap him, whatever he says. But there's no argument, there's no disputation.
But all of these complaints that we need to reform our political systems, I think, come from people who, in their ignorance, but not their stupidity, have had no exposure exposure to rhetoric.
You agree, and I'd go further. You say that not exposed to rhetoric. Of course, they have been exposed to rhetoric, they just don't know it. Because a lot of these rhetorical techniques are used, not necessarily knowingly, but are in the ether and are used by politicians. And I think even if you're not going to deploy rhetoric yourself, it's still really worth knowing about, because you're inoculating yourself against the powerful rhetoric that you might be exposed to by potentially unscrupulous politicians.
Well, it's going to come up at some point, isn't it? We live in a very contentious time with people grandstanding on various different positions around great issues of the day, most notably, of course, the Brexit issue. And people feel that they're hearing one thing on one side, another thing on the other side. Actually, of course, what they're being exposed to exactly is rhetoric, but because they haven't got the skills sometimes, through no fault of their own, to identify what's rhetoric and what's truth, they're going, oh, well, hold on, this person is lying. No, this person is being rhetorical.
Right. Again, they've been let down by a shitty education system.
That might seem like a subtle distinction, but I don't think it is a subtle distinction. No one expects our politician, when they're making a speech, to be giving a clear statement of policy, nothing but the facts.
Right.
That's just not
no
how
one would
it works.
listen to that.
So if you're listening to that, but you don't know the form, you don't know the grammar of what you're hearing, well, maybe that's not on you. Maybe you've been, as you say, you've been let down. But to understand how the world we live in works, you've got to understand rhetoric. And the more you understand rhetoric, the more you're able to discern truth from flourish.
Absolutely, and that's why it's such a shame that this has fallen off the curriculum. And the other thing, I'd go even further and say people worry that politics is somehow debased in this day and age because of the fearsomeness of the arguments on either side. Again, I completely disagree. I think that if you went back to ancient Greece or Rome, that would immediately be recognised as a sign of the health of the body politic, because that means that the arguments are being aired, that there is genuine democratic disagreement that is not being solved by force, is being solved by argument. You want to ask, where did rhetoric come from? Well, as soon as there was democracy, there's rhetoric. So you go back to ancient Athens, the first democracy, there's rhetoric because policy disputes are being solved by persuasion. People have to persuade people to vote for things, and therefore they use rhetoric to persuade them.
And when people are saying, aren't you ashamed to be British at the moment, because there's all this just wrangling in Parliament, the chaps abroad must be looking at us and going, how ridiculous is it? No, our democracy is functioning. It's frustrating sometimes, depending on, regardless of what side you're on, you're not getting what you want at the moment, but our processes are being held up. It's in the law course, it's in the speech.
It's a stress test of the Constitution.
Parliament is doing what it was elected to do. Now, they built another parliament, or
and the courts are doing what they're supposed to do. And you can argue about, and they are arguing about exactly how they are interacting. Again, this is a sign of the Constitution functioning.
And as you say, the ancient Greeks, ancient Romans would have completely understood this. And in fact, today we're going to look at some things which are not entirely dissimilar.
No.
Whereas we travel back in time, 2,000 years or slightly more.
And you get people saying, we're going to leave the Amphitronic League, and leave means leave.
But you have those courts versus politics. It's the Senate, essentially very much like the House of Commons, House of Lords for us. But there's also the law courts going on. These things are.
And there's the Senate versus the executive in the form of the consuls.
Who can't necessarily get the votes through, although they don't go for. They sometimes go for more direct action.
Indeed.
However, there's nothing new under the sun. This is not some great change. Perhaps the late 90s were remarkably quiet. It didn't used to be like that. No, because Tony Blair won a ridiculously large majority.
But that means there was fundamentally a consensus in the country about who was ruling, and therefore
there was no massive arguments going on in politics because they had a majority of 300. So
and he didn't really do anything either. So
there's a few things, I suppose, to be fair play to him. But
No, I meant that as a compliment. I mean, look, the first thing to know is to think about the technology of this, right? So in the early days of democracy, politics is done in public, and there is no tech to help politicians. It is literally people on a hillside in Athens arguing, and so you're using your voice to persuade. A lot of the crowd would have been illiterate, so this is the only way that they are getting.
They didn't know what they were voting for.
The other thing is, it's not only done in public, but your opponents, and in some cases your visceral, physical enemies, are there in front of you, and you could be in physical danger from them. They could beat you up or kill you after the debate if you're rude about them, and this happened. So your life is on the line, the freedom of your country is on the line, the stakes could not be higher. except possibly I was thinking that time that we very bravely argued in the uni JCR that we should have more money for that gnome throwing competition, and apparently this was deemed to be a bad use of funds or whatever. And I think there was some extraordinary rhetorical fireworks on display. Now, we lost that vote, but I think people who were there and still talk about it and remember it all these decades later, still say that we should have won because the force of our argument was so strong.
Yeah, it was an executive sort of shut down the argument, shut down the debate, prorogued.
They basically prorogued
the junior conference. Funnily enough, actually, we met because of rhetoric. Interestingly, we were both at university, and there was a JCR meeting, a junior common room meeting, where essentially all the undergrads get together and we'll discuss the issues of the day and what we thought was important. We were incredibly self-important, as students are. Yeah. And it was always packed. Yeah. And you were 2 years below me, so first year when I was a third year, and your lady wife, as she became, was a second year.
Yeah.
So, and I met you two because you were campaigning a vote from the floor to disaffiliate from the University Students' Union and go it alone. And it's funny enough that we met where you were arguing that we should leave a sort of federal bloc, a federal training
sinister federal bloc. And who was leading the argument on the other side? It was none other than Will Straw.
It was Will Straw.
And it was 52-48.
Who later, of course,
used exactly the same argument.
Who went on to...
He literally said, his argument was it would be racist to leave the student union.
By the way, listeners, we are not making this up.
It was an early run.
The man who led the Remain campaign literally then later went on to run the actual Remain campaign.
Using exactly the same argument.
Which he then was made a commander of the Order of the British Empire in the Year's Honours List for his sterling work in losing what most people would have thought was an open and shut case. Hello, Will.
Well, if you're listening, Will, cheers. There's no rancour, it was...
No, it's good. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next reunion. Con, even you're disappointed. But you had a rehearsal, but you were there, and it wasn't the fact that I particularly had a strong view on leaving out. I did think I voted leave actually on that occasion, but it was this really rhetorical, almost over the top, sort of Ciceronian.
Thank you very much.
I think, which amused me so much. At my 21st birthday was the next day, and I think I just randomly walked up to you and said, "I so enjoy your performance this evening." Obviously, stuffing it to the sort of very po-faced debates that we sometimes had. It was so outrageous. Would you like to come for my 21st birthday party?
Oh yes. Never look back.
Never look back. Here we are, nearly 20 years on.
So that was the end of my career in politics, but it was the start of a
and you didn't
friendship.
Win the vote, unfortunately, to say.
Well, it was gerrymandered, wasn't it? They did a show of hands.
The Remain establishment.
That's right, and they cut me off as well. They wouldn't let me talk for the whole for my allotted time.
You weren't trying to talk for 4 days.
I was trying to filibuster technique. Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
but I and it just amused me so much to see that rhetoric. And who can remember also your infamous attempt to get the food and housing position like a year later, which was a wonderful speech. Hilarious, but quite inappropriate.
It was quite inappropriate, I think I... But actually came pretty close on that occasion.
You did, and that was...
I used a Ciceronian technique because I basically... People were worried that I was... correctly, that I just wanted power. So I just decided to embrace that. And sort of
why do I want this job?
Because
power. That was your opening line. And I think...
And it was also an argument about Brexit champions. Remember, I was trying to whip up sort of populist support for full English breakfast instead of... fruit, which they started to serve disgracefully, in my view. This is where our leading universities.
But again, nothing new under the sun, because you did come close, but you came close because of the disaffected people who turned up. And were sick of us passing resolutions about, incredibly serious, or we should write a letter to the government voting against Fox something and stuff. Okay, yes, well, they get a letter from the Students' Union. Okay, that's going to really inform debate. And so, but of course, a lot of people were using it for a career in politics later. I will, and several other people who later got on to political careers, and you were there. But you were there. Like basically, you were going to the common man, the man who. It was a protest vote, and you came dangerously close. So it is.
I was
funny
posing as a man of the people, even though I was very absolute opposite.
You're a man for the people, not a man of the people.
And we're going to talk about two individuals who did similar things today. Now, I should say that, as we've seen this amazing generation in ancient Athens that invented theatre and philosophy and history, they also invented rhetoric, not just in the sense of these rhetorical techniques that they deployed in these public debates, but also in terms of the study of rhetoric. So Aristotle, who we've already talked about, wrote a book on rhetoric. The skill of rhetoric, he said, fundamentally broke down into three different things. Logos, ethos, and pathos. So logos, that's argument from logic.
Yep.
He says that's the least important. Ethos, argument from character. In other words, trust me, I'm a pretty straightforward kind of guy, right? As Tony Blair things once said. And, and I still... when I see that footage, I still think, yeah, I trust you, Tony. Even though I know the man is outrageous liar. He's so good at the ethos, isn't he, Tony Blair? That is his rhetorical skill.
Well, that's exactly how he got elected. He was the good guy.
You see him come on news
in a
like
shower of bastards.
And you still see him and think, oh yes, use me again, I'll vote for you again. And finally, pathos, which is appealing to the emotions of the audience, and Aristotle says that's the most important. Now, Quintilian, who was a Roman philosopher of rhetoric, reports a story about Demosthenes, who's the first rhetorician we're going to talk about today, who might have been taught by Aristotle, by the way. Demosthenes may have been taught at Aristotle's Academy. And he said, Demosthenes was asked, what are the three most important parts of public speaking? Possibly expecting the answer logos, ethos, and pathos. No, Demosthenes says, has echoes of Blair, delivery, delivery, delivery. And this is really interesting for reasons we'll come on to, because Demosthenes' delivery initially was hopeless. He had a stammer.
Yeah.
So our second speaker that we're going to talk about this morning, Cicero, who literally wrote the book on Roman rhetoric, which we have, it's a surviving text, and in which he catalogues all sorts of techniques with elaborate Latin names that we don't need to go into. But many of those techniques are still used, and you can recognise them. You can recognise politicians using them today. Boris Johnson, who is, of course, he studied classics. He knows all of these things, and he deploys them. Now, he went for a natural style. It's sort of, he was kind of a new wave speaker, so he was reacting against highfalutin language that older rhetoricians would have used, trying to make it sound as if he's being spontaneous, whereas actually, of course, he's done an enormous amount of work. Again, Boris Johnson, if you look at Boris Johnson's speech, he deliberately tries to make it seem like he's just
incredible Hulk thing.
Right. He'd obviously spent all weekend coming up with that.
In fact,
and it was a great line.
Stuart Lee points out, actually, in quite a good article, that he has used this no fewer than 7 times.
Right.
But he always somewhere where he thinks he's not being recorded so he can use it again.
Yes.
And actually, good. I'm not having a go at Johnson here. Classic.
Use your best,
when Hulk gets angry, he gets more powerful. It sounds like the off-the-cuff man of the people talking about, comic books. Oh, what a good chat, Boris. But it's clearly been entirely thought of.
But he's a classically trained, educated
I think
man.
most famously, his after-dinner speech is always where he turns up, he asks what it is.
Yes, pretends that he has it prepared.
And then goes, I completely have no idea what I'm talking about, but I'm going to tell this funny story anyway instead.
Some funny thing happened on the way here.
Yeah. And it's the same story in every after-dinner speech. People have been to more than one of them reporting always gives the same thing. But it's given in
as Stuart Lee points out, although Stuart Lee, I've been to see you on a couple of occasions and heard exactly the same material in exactly the same order. So, and of course, that's what, this is what professionals do, right?
Yeah.
But they make us believe that they're just coming up with it off the cuff. We'll start with Demosthenes. So it's 4th century Athens. So this is a generation or two after the end of the Peloponnesian War. Athens is in decline. It's lost its empire to Sparta. The Greek city-states have continued to fight each other. First the Spartans are on top, then the Thebans are on top, and now the new threat is from Macedonia. So we've talked about Demosthenes saying that he believes delivery is really important. Now, Demosthenes had a stammer and a lisp. It looks like it was some sort of lisp, but possibly that he couldn't distinguish between R and L. So it was a common problem. As interestingly did Cicero, as did Winston Churchill in more recent times. So some of the greatest speakers of all time had really bad speech impediments, which they overcame through extensive training when they were young. Demosthenes was also a physical weakling at a time when physical strength and prowess was obviously admired. We know that he trained himself brutally over years to overcome these problems. And there are some fun stories we've got from Plutarch where he says that Demosthenes, he shaved half his hair off so that he looked so ridiculous that he would not be tempted to appear in public until he had got rid of his stammer. And he used to practice by putting stones in his mouth. I've actually done this. If you go to Athens, the assembly ground where the street is kind of gravelly, and you can pick up some of the same stones that Demosthenes might have whacked in his mouth, put them in your mouth. You have to have a bigger voice, and you have to control your mouth muscles.
I think it's still a famous way of dealing with it. King George VI, I think,
The King's Speech is quite a fun film on this subject.
But I think putting marbles in one's mouth is often understood as a way.
Is that still
I don't know whether it's still used, but it certainly was used until very recently.
That's interesting. On the shaving half your hair off, do you remember the time that I lost a bet and I had to shave off half my beard? That was quite interesting because I had to then continue to appear in public while it regrew. That was part of the challenge. And what I found is that people would kind of look at me. They knew there was something wrong, but they couldn't quite quite put their finger
Which
on it.
half of your beard did you shave off?
So I shaved off my right-hand side.
Right, so straight down the middle.
Straight down the middle.
Yeah.
And then, but I thought it was clever of me, because they hadn't said you have to shave off a particular half, it just I had to shave off half, and I thought, okay, I'll do that. And then I just tried to appear in profile against whoever I'm talking to, one way or the other. So we don't know which half of his hair he shaved off, but he did that. So he then trains as a lawyer, and then he becomes a politician. And he becomes a politician, and he basically starts to whip up the support for the amongst the Athenians and other Greek city-states for the resistance, the Greek resistance to the Macedonian takeover by King Philip II, who is the father of Alexander the Great. And essentially, Philip II starts to unify Greece under him.
He's the Henry VII to the Henry VIII.
Yeah, he's Hideyoshi to Tokugawa Ieyasu.
Yeah.
He's Caesar to Augustus, I suppose you would say.
He's John the Baptist to Jesus.
He's Kendry to Donaldson.
We may disagree about that one. Time will tell.
Time will tell. Anyway, so he basically persuades the Athenians to go to war with Macedon, a last-ditch attempt to defend their democracy against conquest. And he succeeds in whipping up this war, and then he fights in it himself. I mean, the stakes were higher back then. He fights in the front line, although, according to Plutarch, he runs like the bloody hell away as soon as the Macedonians appear over the horizon, and unfortunately the war is lost. And by the way, he may have been a physical coward at the battle, but he was no physical coward in general. He put his money where his mouth was. He gave brave speeches to an audience which included his personal enemies who were in the pay of Macedon, and he pays the ultimate price. He goes into exile, he's invited back, then he has to flee again, and this time he basically has to kill himself. He commits suicide rather than betray the ideals that he has taken a stand on. We'll have a reading of a bit of his rhetoric, but essentially he gave a series of very famous speeches, which we still have, they survive, called the Philippics, in which he attacks Philip of Macedon in front of the Athenian people, explains that he's a tyrant who's trying to take over Greece, and that the only thing the Athenians can do is to resist with force of arms, and he persuades an initially reluctant population to fight. And it's amazing stuff. It's Churchillian. It changed history. Unfortunately, they lost, but at least they had a crack at it.
I think what's fascinating about Demosthenes is that he starts off and he's essentially a hired script writer, a speech writer, I suppose, for other lawyers.
Right.
Which he then segues into becoming a lawyer himself. And sort of does both, because his rhetorical skills are so great. It's a slightly odd job, but someone's like, I need to deliver a speech, can you write that speech for me?
Right.
Which is fine if you're writing a best man speech, but if you're a lawyer, you'd probably expect him writing your own speech. But he did it, and that was how it worked in Athens. Because there was really no distinction between public and private prosecutions. Private citizens would bring actions against the state and then argue against them. So,
and by the way, again, with a massive jury, I thought this was interesting, given what we found out.
200 to 500 people.
500 people, which is odd, because in the mythological first trial, it's a jury of 12.
Yeah.
But, that's just a silly old mythological thing. No, obviously in real life we have a jury of 1,000 people, so all of whom have to be paid at the expense of the state, by the way.
So, it's very easy to see how he goes from being sort of a script writer to a lawyer himself, to a lawyer, to a politician.
The technique that way.
Because that is a natural journey. It's not a change of career. And I suppose so, very many politicians are formerly lawyers.
Or speech writers. Or both.
So he gives the first Philippic, is essentially sort of done in situ. But his other ones go on tour. And they go, this guy's really good. This guy...
Let's have a listen to it.
He riles people up. And later, as you say, he goes into exile, he visits the other towns he goes off to, and he gives these speeches.
Yeah.
And again...
And it worked. And this is interesting. It reminded me a lot of the Two Towers from Lord of the Rings. The bit where they're in Rohan, and you sort of go into another country and try and persuade them to fight for you. And basically, what the Philippics say is, you don't want war, but war is upon you, whether you want it or not, and you're going to have to fight. And we need, we need to fight now. So get your weapons out. The other thing he says is, how are we going to afford this war? You know what? Why don't we stop spending a massive proportion of our GDP on theatre, paying people to go and watch Euripides, particularly now that all of the great playwrights are dead. So it's interesting.
He did cut subsidies to the arts.
He did,
and he created
war.
Well, basically, he set up a rapid reaction force. Essentially, it was to draw a reserve, so that every sort of freedman would pay 2 drachma a year, and basically be ready to raise an auxiliary force.
Yeah.
So his speeches also contain policy.
Yes.
He was saying, this is what we need to do, and this is how we're going to do it. It was a fully costed manifesto.
It's just a shame it didn't work. Yeah. Okay, so what was your reaction to reading some of this stuff now? I mean, obviously we can't listen to it. That's the thing. You just really want to know what it sounded like.
Well, I mean, you could pay an actor to do it. So
Yeah,
actually,
yeah, sure.
This is not. It's a shame actually because theatre is still performed, isn't it? These huge theatres, but the speeches aren't. And I wonder whether there's a gap in the market.
I would love to.
I mean, if you could say, like, oh, what's on at the theatre? Well, we often
We've got the Philippics.
The Philippics. Some chap on stage, brilliant actor. I don't understand why that's not done because it's absolutely genius. If you're listening out there, Chichester is a great idea. Stratford's
I want to hear Simon Callow, getting up there and telling us to arm ourselves.
It wouldn't be. It would be like, oh, we'll get whoever's popular at the moment. The guy off Love Island.
Who's the current Doctor Who?
Comes to absolutely brilliant. As you say, Churchillian. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it when you said, because I hadn't read Philippics, I knew of them, but I hadn't read them. And when you said, right, you need to read all of this, especially since we produced quite a few of these podcasts this week.
Yes, it's been a brutal pace. That's why we're recording at 9 in the morning.
But actually, as you say, you can sort of picture the scene exactly. You sort of find yourself being swept up, even though, obviously, the issues of the day are foreign to us, but they speak to timeless issues. And again,
he explains them as well. I mean, you by the end of it, you know what the policy issues are, right? Because so this isn't just an appeal to ethos.
You don't need to do a lot of background reading. So you can just start the Philippics and you get an understanding of what it's all about.
Now, this is the only possible criticism, but I can see why he needed to do it because he had to change the Athenian policy during the course of the speeches. Is they're quite long. And they're quite repetitive. He is bludgeoning his audience with just, endless, like, no, this is what the Macedonians have done. They've done this, they've attacked this town, they've attacked this town, they've attacked this town, they're coming closer. Last week we voted this, it didn't work. The week before that we voted this, it didn't work. He's got a nice bit where he says, well, you've really been fucking this up, haven't you? But that's good, because if we'd been doing everything we should have been doing, instead of fucking up, and we were still in this mess, then we might be worried. But actually we've been fucking up, that's great, because that means that it's not too late. It's like Churchill in 1940. It's not too late. It's almost too late, but it's not too late. Unfortunately, it was too late.
And to go back to the great issues of our day, unfortunately we lack a Demosthenes or Cicero.
We'll come to that later. I think there is one possible claimant to the crown currently in our parliament.
But we will come to
come to her later.
Actually, people are so invested. I've never known a time where people are so political as they were before. Because
certainly not in this country.
There is a discussion about the destiny of our country.
Yeah, the nation is at stake. Whichever side you're on, you believe that.
Absolutely. So on one level, we are discussing in the Brexit debate fish quotas.
Right,
what import we're going to pay on steel.
Yeah, this isn't, shall we go and rescue the garrison or, shall we massacre the population of such and such a town?
It's war. Fascism is on the rise. However, it has become like that. When you talk to some people, regardless of what side they're on, perhaps actually, particularly on those people who feel that we should remain in the European Union, this has become a great war for civilization for them.
I think that's true of both sides.
The Brexit has become like Trump, that they're the fascists and they're not. And you go, okay, we are talking about fishing rights in waters, and people go, no, it isn't. It's more important than that. It's like
that's how it starts.
Yeah, well,
first they come for your mullet.
But it's like, and that's not to belittle or denigrate the issues that are at stake. It's to request some sort of perspective. However, as someone who's enjoying watching this, and I of course have no political opinions,
completely neutral.
We have got a increase in rhetoric, and I love rhetoric. It's brilliant because what I would say is we're in boom time for people making speeches because no one makes impassioned speeches about mullets. People make impassioned speeches about the destiny of the nation. So whilst I think it's perhaps
Boris Johnson literally did make a speech about herring, didn't he?
But Caesaria. But whilst it's, I think, overreaction and sometimes hysterical to what we're discussing, which is where people's freedom of movement and stuff like that, we've turned it into this great opportunity.
A battle for the soul of the nation.
A battle for the soul of the nation. And that has led to some pretty good speeches. Demosthenes, where are you now?
Yeah. So the only thing I'd say is, if you're going to read some Greek rhetoric, though, this is the absolute pinnacle. Except, I personally still think that the Pericles funeral oration that is recorded in Thucydides' history is even better, and that's shorter. It's designed to do a different thing slightly. The war has already started for Pericles, and he's trying to put some backbone into the nation that has already started the war. So it's a slightly different job that he's doing, but I find that more moving, possibly because my father was reading that speech when I was born. I'm not saying I remember him doing this, but he does. And I read it to my son within minutes of his birth. And
Sorry, I think we're going to need to unpack this.
Yeah.
Why was your father reading Pericles at your birth?
I think he just panicked. And was like desperately trying not to look, probably.
I know. I haven't had a copy of Pericles on me.
So my dad was he's retired now, but he was a teacher. He was a maths teacher at a state school in London. I owe to him my interest in great books, and he happened to be reading Thucydides, as one does. He realised that he wasn't stupid, just ignorant, and he was reading it. And he got to that bit. There's a bit of marginalia in our family copy. Gets to halfway through the Pericles funeration, and he's written that my son is born.
Alistair was born at this point. Yeah.
And I've got exactly the same thing. I got about a page further before my son was born, and I've marked it in the same copy, which I must remember not to lend to you in case I don't get it back.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, I haven't marked exactly what I was reading. Now you've inspired me to go back and think what was on my reading list when the children were born. Yeah, everyone should do that. Yeah. Excellent.
Nothing is easier than self-deceit, for what each man wishes, that he also believes to be true.
So that's Demosthenes. Now, moving on to the second rhetorician we're going to be talking about today, Cicero. Now, what did you... I know you're an absolute fan of this man.
I am a fan of this man. I'm a fan of the whole period, okay? So we're skipping forward in time.
So give us the political and historical background.
Okay, so we're now in the fall of the Roman Republic, which is a brilliant time, fascinating. It's often... there are lots of shortcuts here. The Rome TV series we've mentioned before.
Classic, we were watching it last night.
There have been lots of stories about the fall of the Roman Republic. Star Wars
Episode 3
is essentially the fall of the Roman Republic.
It's done very well.
It's done very well. What we have is the fact that Rome, as a city-state, is now an empire. And at the bottom, fundamental basis is how will this be managed? All of these other issues, these great personalities who shaped the course of history, there's a structural question as to how the city-state, with a political system designed to rule it, which is where the upper classes essentially sit in the Senate, can possibly exercise control of a vast
whole
empire.
Yeah.
And they do that by essentially devolving military power and allowing people to just go off and do whatever they want and report back and bring the spoils of war. Now,
which starts to destabilise.
Because these people become increasingly rich and powerful and popular amongst their armed troops.
Yes, and they've got the army behind them.
Now, fortunately, there was a law to say that no army can ever enter the core Roman territory, which is marked off in the north. It's a peninsula, so the north is the important border by the river Rubicon, which we're not entirely sure which river is the Rubicon.
No, it's still disputed.
There's much to say about the sort of last 100 years of the Roman Republic. There's some huge issues, but essentially the key sort of changing point in history, the fulcrum of history, the starting of our modern age, which happens around about as the BC era
moves to AD,
moves to AD, is that essentially Caesar becomes a hugely powerful figure. The Roman executive...
We're talking about Kieran Hines here, aren't we?
Kieran Hines, yeah. So
just picture Kieran Hines, but balder.
Yeah. The Roman executive, their sort of prime minister, is shared between two people because they've got the system.
Always a good idea.
Which means that...
It didn't work for Sparta, let's copy that.
They didn't want one person to have too much power, so they put two people, which is fine if they get along. And originally, Pompey and Caesar, the other great person, the Gnaeus Pompey Magnus, Pompey the Great, had been the greater man.
Still was, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah, we can discuss.
He was robbed.
Essentially, they had an alliance held together basically by the fact that he was married to Julius Caesar's daughter, Julia. But when Julia died, this really kicks things off. As tensions growing between them, it's really the time of this unstable political structure is over, and Caesar marches with his armies across the Rubicon and essentially takes over Rome and is able to then essentially become the dictator of Rome. Not in the sense that we would understand dictator as necessarily a tyrant. In fact, Caesar was never declared a tyrant, but in the sense that he is the single person given power and authority over it. Now, Cicero lives in this period. He sees the end of the Roman Republic.
He loves deeply, doesn't he? He really cares about it.
He is the last generation to see it's almost the Roman Republic at its height in a sense, because whilst it's on decline, it's about to end. A, they don't know that, and B, they are ruling the world.
Yes, yeah.
So. And he also lives through the dictatorship of Caesar. It doesn't last very long because Caesar, of course, is famously murdered on the Ides of March.
And his murderers hold up the bloody daggers. This all happens in talk about politics in public, and they hold it up and they salute Cicero and they say, right,
Cicero, restore the Republic. Yeah. You're the man. And that is because Cicero himself had been one of the consuls a few years previously. We'll talk a bit about that, his political career in a second. And then Cicero then lives through this hugely tumultuous time, which follows what happens next. Because obviously Caesar's supporters, the Caesarian party, don't just disappear.
They're not going to go quietly until let's go back to the Republic.
And this begins a hugely destabilising period of civil wars between the people who have killed Caesar, they think legally, because they argue he was a tyrant, and the Caesarian party. People like Mark Antony and the man who will later become the first emperor, Emperor Augustus. So we have this period then of about 20 years where those factions are fighting it out.
Beating the hell out of each other.
Yeah, well, which Cicero is writing all about. He's operating
he's right in the middle of
this. And eventually he succumbs to the forces. Spoilers, the Augustus party win, and they essentially liquidate the last remaining Republicans who sort of... And Cicero was a man who exemplified the Republic by that. He'd been come to see. He's one of the people who might claim this as the last Roman.
He's really sort of Rees-Moggian character.
Yeah, absolutely. He is basically a new man. A sort of grammar schoolboy. He is an aristocrat, but a relatively lowly minor one.
And that's interesting, isn't it? And I think that always stays with him. He's playing with the big boys here. We're talking about really rich, powerful men from really rich, powerful families and who've got money and armies behind them. He's not that. He's got, as you say, sort of minor gentry.
Yeah. So he's a lawyer. He works for his money. When he announces to his brother that he intends to run to be consul, it's like, you're an idiot. We're not important enough. We're not political class. Yeah. And so you'll sit in the Senate. Because we're part of the founding of Rome, our family sort of gets that, but we sort of the idea that we might go and play with the big boys is ridiculous. But he does. His career as a lawyer is hugely successful because of the skill, his rhetorical skills. He becomes a sensation
through the law court. I mean, this is interesting. So again, like Demosthenes, he's sort of physically, or like he's physically a complete weakling, but he's not going to be able to forge a career for himself as a great general. Although he does actually fight, he does lead soldiers into battle on occasion.
In the Civil War, he joins up and
in the Civil War he joins. But he decides to make his mark through the law courts, and he deliberately picks on controversial, politically difficult cases.
Ones where he's taking down the big boys. And it's like, I am coming for you, I don't care. He sort of takes on allies of Sulla, who is quite an important figure. He had been
at the time when Sulla said, and this is interesting as well. So he...
Not going after Sulla himself, but essentially...
But some of Sulla's friends or...
On principle, the idea that he's going, I don't care if you've got friends in high places, the law works for everyone. But he
makes a difference. It's like David Panic, isn't it? He takes politically important cases and he wins them through the force of rhetoric, which he has learned because he's studied in Greece. He's gone to Athens, he's learned the kind of... he openly acknowledges that he's learnt from Demosthenes' example.
And like him, was scared of public speaking to begin with. He had to teach himself. Demosthenes is his hero.
Yeah. I think he's got a stutter as well. He's certainly some sort of speech impediment. I think, and he's got stage fright as well, and he has to teach himself the hard way.
And we talked about this Rome adaptation, which clearly, obviously, simplifies things and conflates characters. But
he's played by Mr. Collins from that excellent Pride and Prejudice.
David Bamber, and I think it's a superb piece of casting because it sort of looks right. He's sort of a coward and a smarmy one,
right?
And yet he may well be the cleverest person in the room as long as Octavian isn't in the room,
right? Yeah.
And if he had been less of a coward, he may have been more of a force against Caesar.
Right.
Basically, his downfall is to not realise that the gloves have come off
in time,
and that people like Caesar and Mark Antony
are not there to fuck around.
Not playing by the rules. That he won't be able to take them down by the force of rhetoric. But essentially, the sword is actually mightier than the pen.
Although the first time that he's challenged by a potential strong man, he does defeat him with the force of rhetoric.
Yep.
I mean, this is the extraordinary moment that, to be fair, he milks for all it's worth. But tell us a bit about the Cataline conspiracy.
So the Cataline conspiracy is sort of the great moment before the Caesar great moment in Rome. It's the immediate predecessor. So essentially, we've talked about the fact that the Roman political system was incredibly destabilised by this point. There is a conspiracy of a group of people. The details don't matter, but essentially it is to share power between him and his friends, to subvert democracy.
It's a naked kind of military takeover, or it's a coup, isn't it?
It's an oligarchical takeover.
Yeah,
It's basically saying we're going to redesign the systems of the Republic, we're going to appoint all of our friends to it, and then it's just going to be permanently be us. And we have enough power to ensure that, though we will notionally follow through the political systems of electing consuls and stuff, it's always going to be someone from our slate.
Yeah.
And Cicero sees this, but this is going up with the big boys. Like essentially, the Cataline conspirators seize the
they've got armed
gangs
roaming through the streets, haven't they?
So Godwin's laws go back. It's essentially how the sort of fascists took over.
Yes,
they've got paramilitary groups of people.
This is more like the sort of beer Keller putsch, isn't it? Yeah. It's the early sort of attempt to try and do that.
And he essentially, that is Cicero, confronts the conspirators on the floor of the Senate House and speaks to them for 4 days. 4 days of whipping up the others, because clearly there are a lot of people in this situation. And Sartre talks about what do you do in a situation where a tyranny takes over. We essentially got 3 options: you join them, you fight them, and you don't say anything.
Yeah,
and of course,
being French, he collaborated.
Yeah, and 2 of those, are problematic if you're trying to fight.
Right.
And the question is that great middle, the people who go, I don't like this, but I'm not going to do anything about it because it's too dangerous. Armed guards, beer hall putsch, and he sways those.
Right.
That's the thing.
He brings the moderates out.
He brings the moderates out, and essentially it ends with such is the power of his speech, which we have, is that he then they sort of the moderates and the opposing force are so outraged that they seize the conspirators.
Yes.
They take them up to the Tarpeian Rock, basically.
And they kill them.
They kill them, and they strangle the conspirators because he's considered. He actually argues it's not safe to leave these people alive.
Right.
If we don't act now,
they'll come for us.
Yeah. If we condemn them but do nothing.
Yeah.
And that is quite a change from his early mild-mannered speech. And because of this, he is considered the hero of Rome, although he faces, for many years after the allegations, he's illegally killed these people. There's a lynching.
Yes.
There's no judicial thing, which he knows, because he says it's too dangerous. And he's declared consul, and he achieves this great power. He becomes a great man.
Well, no, he was consul. I have to pick you on. He was consul already.
You're right. Yes, he had already managed to do that.
But by defeating Cataline. So this is what sparks the Cataline says, okay, if I can't win it democratically, I'm going to take you out.
You're quite right. And interestingly, of course, as you say, he dines out on this for the rest of his life. And people tire of it quite quickly. For the first 10 years, they build him a new house. They declare him. They give him honours and stuff like that. And he
milks it for.
He's a bit like Winston Churchill after the Second World War.
Right. People want to move on, and he can. Did I ever mention the time that I saved the Republic? I think you have mentioned it a few times.
And indeed, when we get to his speeches, which are the ones we're going to look at, where essentially he later, after Caesar has come and gone and been murdered, and Mark Antony is attempting to seize power in Caesar's name or wrestle control of that faction, he writes a series of speeches against Mark Antony, which he calls the Philippics, because he actually actively models his criticism on Demosthenes.
Before we come on to the Philippics, just to follow you up on this Catilinarian, which is the name of the speech that he gives against Cataline that defeats him. I thought it was fascinating. So I was rereading this. I should say we have this because, as you say, Cicero is milking it for all it's worth. He publishes the text. He's probably improved it a bit, but
he was talking for 4 days.
He was talking for 4 days. But you can see the drama of the fact that Cataline is sitting in the bench opposite him, and basically Cicero kind of says, you're going to kill us, or we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
This is the stakes could not be higher.
And of course, Cataline can't do anything there and then because that would just prove the point. And there's some great political rhetoric about what a tyrant he is, but there's also some low blows. I mean, over 4 days, he essentially accuses him of killing his own wife, other things which I'm too polite to mention, which is a reference, we think, to the fact that there were rumours that he had also killed his own son and potentially deflowered his daughter, and committed potentially a human sacrifice. Which, again, question which is worse. The whole the incest taboo.
But I just love this Ciceronian technique of saying, well, I'm not even going to talk about the time when you murdered your own wife. That's a classic rhetorical technique.
Got your daughter pregnant and sacrificed someone.
But we're not going to talk about that.
We'll gloss over that and talk about your policy decisions. And it's genius.
It's fantastic. And the other thing he does, we talk about, people know about the rhetorical question, right? This is probably where people know the word rhetoric most. He outdoes even Jeremy Paxman. Famously, Paxo asked Michael Howard the same question 47 times on Newsnight, and Howard couldn't answer it. So the Cataline oration, he opens with a series of over 50 questions that Cataline can't answer because they're rhetorical questions. So, by the end of which, Cataline is looking like he's in serious trouble. And the thing that's so fascinating is the speech, as you said, he brings around the moderates who initially are a bit sceptical about, it's really this terrible conspiracy. Do we really believe that this is going to happen? And what's brilliant is you can see this in the speech. You can read between the lines as to what's happening in the room. Yeah. So you can tell the moments where Cataline's heckling him, trying to interrupt him, and he's shouting him down. Yeah. And he directly addresses him.
Stage directions.
Yeah. He's like, Cataline, don't say that because.
Yeah. So if we were to put this on the stage and again, please, someone do it. We know what other people are doing, as you say, because we have his responses.
And he's at one point, it's brilliant. He sort of thinks that he's got further than he has, and he sort of asks the audience to support him, asks the other senators to support him, and there's silence. And then brilliantly, he turns that round by saying, I noticed that no one is clamouring to defend Cataline. And at this point, the moderates realise they can't sit this out, they've got to choose sides, and they start to phically move away from, and he talks about this, physically move away from sitting next to Cataline. So eventually Cataline sits on his own.
The Senate is essentially a sort of a semicircle, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they divide by parties.
Right.
So it's quite common to indicate your support by moving to
and it's brilliant. By then Cataline's, and then Cataline's isolated, and then Cicero basically, he starts to say, Cataline, just go, in the name of the gods, just go, leave. And Cataline does. He eventually runs away, flees the city, and is killed, and that's the end of the conspiracy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cicero, his career is marked by doing novel things. For such a traditionalist.
We've talked about how he's milked this for all it's worth. The Roman historian Sallust, quite a good read, by the way. He deliberately is writing in the style of Thucydides, very cynical, and it's quite fun. And he writes a short history about the Cataline conspiracy. But this is interesting. He doesn't really mention this speech, right? So he focuses on the arguments that are happening in the Senate, but he doesn't focus on Cicero taking down Cataline, which leads us just a tiny suspicion, given that Sallust was effectively on Cicero's side about this, that maybe Cicero has exaggerated the importance of the speech. Because what Sallust focuses on is another moment of high drama in the Senate, again, another moment of rhetorical fireworks, where Caesar, who is suspected of having been involved in the conspiracy of Cataline, but manages in a slippery way to get himself out of it, makes a brilliant speech where he basically says, I'm sure these guys are guilty and there's nothing to do with me, Governor, but I think we shouldn't, let's not just kill them right now, because, let's think about it and due process, and we don't want to establish a bad precedent that could come back in the future. Heaven forfend that we undermine.
Someone else might try something like this a few years later.
And then Cato, by Juno's cunt, this is the sort of the person who's even more old-fashioned than
he is Jacob Rees-Mogg.
He really is Jacob Rees-Mogg. Cato gets up and gives us an absolute sort of storming speech where he says, "No, we can't take any risks with this."
Which again, we have these speeches. It's like going on YouTube.
Yeah.
We have the speeches of all of these people,
and they're literally arguing about killing their co-senators.
Yeah, which is it's absolutely superb.
Yeah, you think that you've watched heated Prime Minister's questions? This is literally life or death stuff.
And in terms of these speeches can be read. That's the thing. I mean, but if you want a shortcut, I think at this point we have to mention Robert Harris, a brilliant author.
Yes.
So Harris is your read on an aeroplane, and I don't mean any disrespect to Robert Harris. They are rip-roaring, brilliant stories. They're not high lecture. He's not going to win the Booker Prize, but he is brilliant. I think he is the best at what he does.
And this is the best of his work, I think.
Absolutely. So he writes a trilogy of books about the life of Cicero, which he calls, now let me remind, I have to go and have a look at them. They're called Imperium, Lustrum, and Dictator.
Yeah, and in the States they're called the Conspiracy Trilogy, I think it's called.
I think so. But it's a Cicero trilogy, I think, in the UK. But anyway, so, and Imperium talks about the rise of Cicero, how he essentially becomes consul. Lustrum is about the Cataline conspiracy, and Dictator is the end of his life and his sort of life during the civil wars and the reign of Caesar.
And Harris has done his homework, hasn't he? He's clearly read the speeches, he's read Sallust, he's read the others.
Well, he said when he was writing Pompeii, another book he wrote, which actually personally I don't think is one of his better ones, but he was so fascinated by Roman history and the life of
really?
Cicero,
That's how he got into it?
He got into it, and then he realised he was only not going to be able to write one book about it, because he was such an interesting guy.
expanded to trilogy.
And he absolutely nails it, partly because he relies on the speeches, because we have so many of them. He is really great at setting these scenes. So, I mean...
There's a play version as well, isn't there? I don't know if it's still on, but if that's ever performed again, I'd very strongly recommend that.
I missed it, but you went to see it at Stratford.
Yeah, and I think they do it over 2 evenings, but it's the whole trilogy, and it is, again, watching these speeches performed
because Harris is using the actual speeches. He doesn't need to rewrite anything. So there's some brilliant scenes that he captures really well. And also mentions, for example, just as a link to some of our other stuff, the suggestion that, bizarrely, Cicero's wife suspected him of having an affair with Clodia. Who we mentioned...
This is the same Clodia, is it?
The same Clodia, the Catullus.
She got around a bit, didn't
Well, we
she?
did say that, I wish she was a positive woman, not ashamed of her sexuality. Although she was married and shagging her brother.
Killed her husband.
Yeah, killed her husband.
This is a feminist icon.
So she's a bit of a tease, and as a result, in order to defend the honour of Clodia, his sister and possible lover, Clodius, who's a sort of quite an important character in the fall of the Roman Republic, attacked by Clodius, and he fled into exile, and he then gets welcomed back essentially by Pompey, which is how he ends up in the Pompeian faction for the end of the during the coming.
That's right, and this is fascinating. I think Harris captures this really well. Before we come on to the sort of denouement here of Cicero's life, the interaction of the political with the personal. I thought this was fascinating, this stuff, and it's tied up with his personal life, which Harris follows through. So he's married to a sort of venerable Roman matron, whom he divorces in order to marry, possibly for political and financial reasons, a much younger woman. Yeah. But he also has a daughter by his first marriage, who he loves very, very deeply.
He's devoted to her.
And we have his letters about this when she dies. He is deeply, deeply upset by it. And it's really interesting, you sometimes think about ancient Romans, particularly of the stern Ciceronian type, as perhaps a bit unfeeling. Did they really care about women in their lives, their children, particularly their daughters?
And also because infant mortality was so high, it's easy to think that they didn't care as much.
My goodness,
but they did.
I can't think of many things from the whole of history and the whole of literature that show how an individual mourning his dead daughter to compare to this, and that's fascinating that it's Cicero who does it, and clearly even amongst this political fireworks, even his political enemies acknowledge this. So we have, there were letters from Caesar saying, actually, genuinely, I'm really sorry that your daughter died, and it's fascinating.
Obviously, we're on different sides of the argument. We clearly, at one point, we may end up killing each other, or our family will. But fair play. You're having a hard time. I'm really sorry to hear that, because we're not savages.
We're not savages. I know. I thought it was deeply civilized. On this question of civilization, I think this is something that Harris. Again, he sort of covers this a bit, that when he's in exile, Cicero goes back to, basically sort of goes back to university for a bit, and he sort of takes himself out of politics, and he goes to his other love, which is philosophy. And, so
he is a philosopher.
He's a philosopher as well. Yeah. He studied Plato. He brought lots of new words into Latin so that he could write about philosophy with the same depth that the Greeks had. The word humanitas, for example, from which we get humanity, and the humanities, which is what we're talking about, Cicero invented that word.
Yeah. And it's rather like, I think, he is the Shakespeare of the classical world.
Yes.
In the sense that he invents the words, but also, if you think of another scriptwriter that does those rousing speeches to war, Henry V, why I admire Cicero so much is because he is, as you say, this very human character, this philosopher, but also this polymath in many ways. He's an inventor of language, and his personal life and his professional career intersect with the greatest period, the period of history which is the most interesting to me.
Yeah, it's certainly hard to think of others that are more interesting.
The first century BC in Rome
is absolutely fascinating.
Interesting place to be. Not sure,
not very nice place to be. Yes.
But,
and that's why, by the way, Shakespeare would have studied rhetoric, and so when he writes Henry, these are Ciceronian techniques that are being deployed when Shakespeare writes the speeches. And it's worth saying also that Cicero was the rediscovery of Cicero, actually it was his letters, but then his speeches and his other works, including his philosophical works, by Petrarch, who we're going to come on to in later podcasts, that arguably kick-started the Renaissance. So Petrarch rediscovered this, and it started a kind of craze for, oh wow, this ancient stuff's amazing, let's go and find it, let's dig it out of the monasteries, let's take the Catullus out of the bunghole of the wine barrel and read it.
So, yeah, I mean...
So that's not bad. Posthumously, not only does he try to defend the dying gasps of Republican government in the ancient world, but he also kickstarted the Renaissance. That's not bad going.
No, I mean, he is. If you know that dinner party challenge, you can have a dinner party with 3 people ready for history. I don't know. I'll need over the course of this podcast series to decide who it is, but I'm willing to declare now that Cicero is one of them. Cicero, yeah. He's probably a pain in the ass. Perhaps maybe before the Cataline. I
don't want to hear that again. We've got Plato, Nietzsche, Leonardo da Vinci haven't had a word in edgeways, and we're still listening to you blithering on about Cataline.
I mean, to be fair, so we mentioned it before. His Philippics, and that's why we picked the two, because they both have great works called the Philippics. Cicero's deliberately named after it. The Cataline was one of the texts that we read this week. After this is all done, the Philippics, his works against Antony, which are very much in the same style as Demosthenes, or not just in the same style, but for the same purpose, to rise up the masses against a tyrant that he sees not as a foreign invader like Philip of Macedon, but as actually dangerous Caesarian party, which has become more reckless because Caesar, amazingly, was a very stabilising influence. Mark Antony is a brute. He lacks the subtlety of Caesar. And essentially, once Caesar is gone,
Caesar, it's really interesting this. I think, as with the fact that Demosthenes, Alexander the Great is a sufficient legend that even though Demosthenes is his enemy, he doesn't hurt him. Yeah. Right? He acknowledges that he's a great man and he lets him sort of live in retirement. But it's his successors who come and basically force him to die. Yeah. Exactly the same with Caesar. Caesar knows that Cicero is a declared enemy of his by the end of the political action here. But he also respects him, and he invites him around for dinner, that sort of thing. But it's his successor that says, right, I'm not having this.
And so Mark Antony lacks that subtlety. He doesn't take insult well, and it is an insult because the power of Mark Antony as rising, Cicero sees it as a great threat, but because, of course, he still can't conceive that Mark Antony's just really going to kill him, he still thinks the answer is to, I'll write some speeches about it.
It worked last time.
It worked last time. Speeches are the way. And unfortunately, he was very wrong there. But he doesn't just write one speech. He writes 14 speeches.
Which he delivered over a course of days. And, and they're long speeches, and they're deeply insulting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like, and he kind of walks away from it going, well, that's fine, all fair. This is what we do. We write insulting speeches about each other. So, a lot of water passes under the bridge here because there's obviously a lot of events. It's quite a fascinating period of history. But just to put a postcard about how it ends.
Well, hang on, before we get on can we sort of examine why is Mark Antony quite so pissed off with him? Because it's not just that he makes these 14 speeches saying that this guy's a tyrant. He gets into some pretty personal
territory. He calls him an idiot, which arguably Antony is not a cultured man.
But he doesn't just call him an idiot, he basically calls him a sort of toga-top bumboy, doesn't he?
He does call him a toga-top bumboy, yeah. A drunken puker, rather like yourself, a gambler, and he accuses him of all sorts of things, consorting with pimps and prostitutes and child prostitutes, and worst of all, I think we can all agree with Cicero here, mime artists.
But I love the idea that Shakespeare missed out this bit, that he missed a trick here. Why isn't there suddenly a scene where Mark Antony's there and there's some guy
pushing against the wind? Oh, this plate of glass. So, I mean, it's hard not to agree.
That is hard. You can see why Mark Antony was pissed off.
Now, Augustus, so just to understand who Augustus is, Caesar has a great nephew, Julius Caesar has a great nephew, who is a chap called Octavian. Upon Caesar's death, because he has no sons, he posthumously adopts his great nephew as his son.
So he's an adopted son.
Which is just fine, and therefore he becomes the inheritor of all of Caesar's considerable wealth, which for political reasons is not confiscated. Now, there's some argument between the conspirators who killed Caesar.
This is Brutus and Cassius.
Which is Brutus and Cassius.
They're the leaders.
And the Caesarian party, Mark Antony and the others, as to what do we do? How do we deal with the fact that we have just killed someone who's legally the head of Rome, because because the Senate had voted him dictator, they were under huge element over threat of force. So it's actually Cicero.
And this is an argument that happens again through the force of rhetoric, right? Yeah. They are literally arguing it out in the Senate and in the
funeral speeches.
And Shakespeare does get this bit, right? Absolutely, he absolutely nails it.
And Cicero is a key person in this. And essentially, he makes what will prove to be eventually a terrible error, which is what they do is they accept that Caesar will not be declared a tyrant, that his actions will be considered lawful, and this allows the Caesarian party to essentially continue to exist. And the reason for doing this is because they want to avoid a civil war.
But unfortunately, the civil war is exactly what they get.
Postpones the civil war. But Fortunately for the conspirators, the Republicans, I might say, the leadership of the Caesarian party then becomes a question about whether Mark Antony, as Caesar's right-hand man, his general, he sees himself as the natural successor, whereas, of course, Octavian, a young boy, has just been made his legal successor. And no one really expects the move that Octavian makes.
It's a bold move.
It's a bold move, and everyone's underestimated him.
Yeah.
He is another weakling, physically,
yes,
but he's
very young.
Incredibly clever.
Yeah.
And Octavian, or now, as he knows, known as Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, because he's taken his father's name, legal father, actually his great nephew, so he is a relative, essentially fights. It becomes a three-way fight.
Yeah.
It's Antony versus Caesar, the new Caesar, Octavian, and the Republicans. And actually, the rest of the story of the Roman Republic is these three teaming up against each other, knocking one out, and that's how it runs for the next 10 years or so.
And it's unbelievable bloodshed and slaughter.
Yeah, and it actually sort of ends with...
last man standing.
Well, Octavian and Antony form an alliance in order to defeat the Republicans.
Right.
And this is known as the second triumvirate, because there is a third person in it, some guy called Lepidus, who's just basically the random who's brought in, and he quietly they divide the empire between them. Antony gets Egypt and the really the bits that people want. Octavian gets Rome and the West, and they give Lepidus Africa and Cyprus, basically. And he quietly sort of disappears, and he knows he's onto a good thing. And I think they go for a triumvirate just to keep it a bit more stable, than having these two rivals. And there's a political precedent for triumvirates in Rome.
But unfortunately, it's a bad one because as with the first triumvirate, it leads to a civil war. Yeah.
So eventually, Lepidus out of the picture, sort of quietly. Antony and Octavian essentially come to war. They finally fight in a huge naval battle at Actium, and Antony is defeated, and Octavian then becomes, sort of the king, but the Romans hate kings, and he, again, very cleverly makes himself that he legally holds a number of different positions, which gives him supreme power.
It's a bit like Xi Jinping. I mean, he's not the emperor of China, but he's
the emperor of China.
But he's effectively the emperor of China.
And actually, in some ways, similar to what the Cataline conspiracy was attempting to achieve, in the sense that it becomes an oligarchy, but it's an oligarchy of one.
Yes,
that he is both people's tribune, high priest of Jupiter, consul. He decides not to appoint a second consul that year, which is legal precedent for, but it's incredibly irregular. And then suddenly everyone goes, oh my god, Octavian basically is king. And because they now realise that
it's too late.
It's too late. They decide
Cicero was vindicated.
Well, absolutely. And they declare him Augustus, which is the title they give him, the August one, the amazing
And that's
one.
that's how we know him.
And that's
today.
how we know him. But Augustus, again, rather like Caesar, very civilised, not entirely civilised person, but
I was going to say, it depends on how you define civilised.
But he had a lot of respect for Cicero. He was an old-fashioned chap. He genuinely believed in drawing more power to himself. That he was restoring the Republic. It was just it wasn't possible for it to go on like it was before. So essentially, I'll create it to be an empire. But he saw himself as continuing. He had a back to basics policy.
Right. And like Caesar, he wouldn't probably have killed Cicero himself, even though Cicero had effectively argued against him.
However, Mark Antony, in this brief period where they are ruling together, it turns out they need a lot of money for their projects that they're going to do. They basically made a lot of promises, £39 million a week for the NHS or something. They don't have that money, so they decide to they get what they call the prescriptions, where they basically make a long list of people to kill, and they decide they'll kill them and seize them as enemies of the state. And it's the moment when if you're a big fan of Augustus like I am, it is the moment which is hard to swallow.
Yes.
It is the thing he does, which otherwise...
Because he basically agrees, doesn't he, that all of everyone that Mark Antony wants killed gets on the list.
And one of those people is Cicero.
You called me a toga-top bomb boy, you're going on the list.
And so he's caught trying to flee Rome. He absolutely recognises that he's lost. He bows to his captors like a gladiator accepting death. He's very reasonable. He bares his neck and is straight to the soldiers. He at the last moment he's brave. He doesn't have a choice.
He even cracks a joke. I mean, I thought this was interesting. He cracks a joke. His dying words, as recorded, are basically a joke. He says to the soldier who kills him, as he bares his neck like a gladiator to the soldier who's been sent to kill him, he says, "What you're doing isn't proper, but at least do it properly. Give me a nice clean cut, please."
But the little epilogue to this is that in addition to chopping off his head, His hands are chopped off, apparently on Antony's direct orders, where they are taken back to Rome and nailed to the rostra, because they are the hands which penned the Philippics. So Antony didn't really let it go.
His head is there.
And that was like 10 years, 15 years later by this point.
Right, he hasn't forgiven or forgotten. And Antony's wife, who's also been attacked by Cicero, insists on having the tongue pulled out of the head and is jabbed repeatedly with her hairpin stuck through it. Yeah. This is a grisly end,
Yeah. Well, we learned from Oedipus that women's jewellery is dangerous for parts of men's heads.
Indeed. Although there's a postscript here, which I think maybe just gives a little bit of satisfaction, doesn't it? Which is, okay, he's lost and he's been beheaded and his head is nailed to the rostra. But his son, Cicero Jr., basically, posthumously, and after all the civil wars are over, Augustus invites him to be a co-consul.
Yeah,
and
because he still goes through the
motions
that we should have consuls.
Yeah,
but he is essentially a standing consul.
Yes. Yeah. So Augustus has all the power, but Cicero's son gets to be the person who posthumously revokes all of Antony's honours. So there's a bit of a family revenge.
Augustus is perfectly happy with as well.
Yes.
But by bringing nice touch, bringing the Ciceros in to do it.
Just shows how clever he was.
And one of the sort of actions against Antony at that point is the declaration that no one of the family Antonius may ever bear the first name Marcus. So,
is that right?
Mark Antony, we talk about. I mean, there's so many Romans with the same names. When we talk about Brutus, for example,
quite confusing.
There are two Brutuses, two very important Brutuses.
Yeah.
One of them who overthrew Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome, and the one who overthrew Caesar. And in fact, he's very aware of his destiny. So,
he is. Yeah. And there was also graffiti in Rome saying, wasn't it? Brutus Jr. What are you doing? You've got this Caesar setting himself up as king. Why haven't you killed him?
Yeah, because that's your job. You're Brutus.
Yeah.
So there's lots of, if you're a fan of Roman history, it can get confusing because there are multiple people.
And people with multiple names as well, like Octavian, Augustus.
But Mark Antony, we know who we're talking about with Mark Antony, because whilst there were previous Mark Antonys, but he was the last Mark Antony. Yeah, they really didn't like him.
It's cracking stuff, isn't it?
Cracking stuff.
A nation can survive its fools, and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly. But the traitor moves amongst those within the gates freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself.
We talked about how Cicero and Demosthenes are, inspired by Demosthenes, and Cicero then himself, perhaps probably more than Demosthenes, has inspired modern world.
Yeah.
We rediscovery of his work,
from Shakespeare onwards.
The Renaissance. Yeah, absolutely. He is clearly, historically and culturally, hugely significant. Question we keep on coming back to. We talk about perhaps the death of rhetoric in the modern world.
Right.
It's a dying thing. Give me some examples, or do you think? Because whilst it's not as common to our way of
it's not as central to our public life, possibly.
A much better way of putting it, but there are, I think, great examples.
Absolutely, and I think there's been a rediscovery a little bit because of Barack Obama, who I think of contemporary politicians is probably the one who is most credited, and rightly so, with being a great rhetorical speaker. And he really came to power on the back of his rhetoric. He was an outsider within the Democratic Party of the States. Yep. He is, whatever side of the political divide you're on, he is clearly a very, very great speaker, and he uses some quite old-fashioned techniques, and again, he goes straight.
He's calm. He's patient speaker.
Yeah.
His speeches are clearly all speeches.
Yes.
He's not doing that shooting from the hip kind of thing, which Boris Johnson and perhaps Trump to a certain extent.
Right.
Not I'd really like to compare them because Johnson's clearly much better at it.
Yes.
But whereas he is more of the highfalutin, not early thing.
And I think that's quite an American tradition. And this is interesting. So Obama harks back deliberately to, in my opinion, the greatest of the modern speechmakers, which was Martin Luther King.
Yep.
Obviously, there's that tradition in the States that comes through the Baptist Church and stuff of call and response speeches with the audience, which is something that had come out of the Baptist movement. Martin Luther King, of course, deliberately harking back to Lincoln, is standing in front of the statue of Lincoln and says, 5 years and whatever ago. Lincoln deliberately used archaic language harking back to the founding fathers. who themselves were harking back to classical Rome. So,
and America, you only have to look at it as classical architecture, and the choice of the Senate. They looked to ancient Rome and said, well, let's build a republic there.
Yeah, it's the fourth Rome, isn't it? Now, I think this is really interesting. In Britain, I think the tradition is possibly slightly different because we have a different system of people who are obviously often from an aristocratic or royal background, trying to appeal to the people. So you've got Elizabeth I, the great Tilbury speech, where she appears in armour, the Armada, bloody Spanish dons are coming over the horizon, and she's trying to whip up her soldiers ready to fight. And she's just the queen. In those days, it's shocking. She's a woman. What's she going to do? Well, she says, "I'm a warrior." Churchill, in 1940, of course, very famous, made a series of speeches. In different contexts, he made speeches in cabinet, which changed the mind of the cabinet from appeasement to war, basically, the war had already started, but this was we are not going to surrender, we're going to carry on fighting. Did the same thing in Parliament, and the same thing through radio to the people. But it is worth pointing out that Hitler was clearly an extremely effective, dangerously effective rhetorical speaker, and he realised, he was one of the first people to realise the power of the microphone. So this isn't just about the human voice in a room full of people on a hillside. He can address huge crowds, and he can whip them up into a hate-filled frenzy over hours. And he did very much like Demosthenes. He practiced at home, he's sort of in front of the mirror. This was a technique that he taught himself, and unfortunately he changed the world with it. But against him, we've got people like Churchill, who, again, born with a stammer, a speech impediment, overcomes it through practice, becomes a great speaker, and we look back at his speeches today, they're very, very famous. And Churchill realised that you could use the radio to get into people's brains, into the brains of the public and change their mind. A bit like what we're doing with this podcast.
Absolutely.
And I think we put ourselves up there.
Well, I think, Demosthenes, Cicero, Churchill,
Kendrick.
To champions, yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, and the thing the speech perhaps that is the single most important, Churchill's speech actually is one that we don't have a recording of, is the speech he made in cabinet immediately after Dunkirk, where the cabinet are wobbling, basically saying, maybe we could talk to the Italians, come up with some sort of a deal, stay in the customs union, sort of thing. And he says, no, uses Ciceronian technique. I'm sure that you will all agree, all the decent men around this table, you're all brave men, we are going to go down choking in our own blood. That's what he says. And I have to say, now that our democracy is once again being, under stress, I am so glad that cometh the hour, cometh the man, or in this case the woman. Thank goodness that we have got someone of the stature of Jess Phillips to take on that sacred mantle of defending freedom using nothing but the force of her own rhetoric. Let's listen to something that she said a couple of weeks ago in Parliament.
I want to, I suppose, speak really, really plainly and say that tonight I will absolutely vote against the general election, just like I would vote against pretty much anything the current Prime Minister put in front of me, because they have I'm going to warn Mr. Speaker that I'm not cracking on the old parliamentary, the protocols and everything, and I fear I may say some things that are unparliamentary. Please feel free to alert me to them. I have absolutely no faith in anything that the current Prime Minister says. Literally none. The Prime Minister that we have at the moment is playing some bully boy game of some bully boy public school that I probably won't understand any more than I understand parliamentary procedures. It's not all that clear. We're all a little bit confused.
Moving stuff, that, and you can see we've got some very different styles of speaking here, but you didn't mishear that. This is genuine footage from Parliament that we've just played you. That was Jess Phillips arguing against your democratic right to vote in an election. This is Jess Phillips, who you are paying £75,000 a year to sit in Parliament. Right? She just stood up. You heard that, right? She stood up to say no. Basically, because I'm a Democrat, I'm not going to allow you to have an election, and I'm also going to vote against the will of the people as expressed in the referendum, whatever you think of that. Now, her reasoning was, it was an argument from ethos, Aristotle would say. She basically just said, because I don't like Boris Johnson. I don't like him because he went to a posh school, and because he went to a posh school, he's better educated than me. He understands all these parliamentary procedures that he's trying to use, and I don't understand. I'm only an MP that you're paying to understand these things. I couldn't possibly, because of my shit education, I couldn't possibly just go away and look up the parliamentary procedure rules. Or I can't, there's some sort of trick. But I'm going to vote against him anyway, just because I don't like him. I can't really think of any arguments.
But in and itself, that is, and I sense the strengths of your feeling about what did you put it, the Jess Philippics.
You're right.
Yeah, but she is herself using a rhetorical argument. It's a
technique.
It is a technique.
She's pretending to be an idiot.
Yeah, because she's not an idiot. She's pretending to.
She is an idiot. She's an idiot pretending to be an idiot. This is the extraordinary irony of the situation.
But in doing so, she is trying to identify with the people who are sick of all of this stuff going on in politics. They also don't like Boris Johnson because he was posh.
He's a Marmite figure, fair enough.
And all these parliamentary procedures are people are sort of sick of on all sides. And then it's kind of like this appeal. Oh, forget all this nonsense and blather. Right. We know what the right thing to do is, so let's just do it.
So it is an ancient technique. She is trying to be, a figure of the people, even though she is, let us just stress, being paid extremely handsomely, and she is a political leader. She is trying to say, and she deliberately, her technique, I don't know what Aristotle would call it, but it's to make an animal noise. I notice she does this a lot. She just says, "Oh," in a sort of deliberately ugly kind
Aristotle
of put on, if she can't think of anything to say,
rhetoric,
she doesn't repeat it. She just, and it's extraordinary. And this is the kind of stuff that would score 0 points in a school debating competition, even in the kind of bog standard comprehensive school that she pretends to have come from. Actually, of course, she went to a posh grammar school, something that she doesn't tend to mention. But she's pretending to be a pleb, and the way she does that is because she is extremely patronising.
Just to clarify, the reference to people in the state school in pleb is definitely in the Roman sense. Yeah. Let's not have the whole bicycle of Downing Street incident about
But she's trying to be a plebeian, and she, in her patronising way, thinks that the plebs will assume that she's one of them if she just makes animal noises, which she presumably thinks that plebs do. So she goes, when she's standing up in the mother of all parliaments. So, and you just want to say, Jess Phillips, just go and listen to yourself, watch yourself, realise how shit you are at public speaking, and do something about it. No one is stopping you. Demosthenes went and lived in a cave and shaved his hair off and practised until he was good at this.
Well, read Demosthenes.
No one is stopping you from doing this. We didn't read this shit at school. Yeah. We read it in our spare time. There is nothing to stop you from improving.
Well, listen to the podcast, yes.
Yeah, just come and listen to the podcast.
And of course, we'd like to invite you, if you want to come on the podcast.
And take us down.
You could come talk about Plutarch with us.
Yeah, we would love to. Yeah. Oh, there's some sort of conspiracy from posh people. No, and this is the thing. I mean, just to talk to the audience here that are listening to this, Jess Phillips, she is exactly the sort of person who says to you, culture is not for you. Political rules are not for you because you haven't had the fortune of the education, because you're not a patrician. It is for you. Don't let her tell you that. There is nothing to stop you. Go out there.
Don't be scared by it.
Don't be scared by it. Don't be scared by it.
We read this on a train.
Yeah. Demosthenes didn't go to, actually Demosthenes did go to a posh school, I suppose. He was taught by Aristotle. But Cicero didn't. He taught himself. Yeah. He taught himself. There's nothing to stop you teaching yourself this stuff. Go away and read about it, think about it, and craft your skill. This is someone who has complained. And I think there's a very good point here. She's complained about some of the violent language that politicians have been using in the Brexit debate. Yeah. Saying things like, "I wouldn't stab so and so in the back. I'd stab him in the front." Oh, who said that? Jess Phillips said that. That's the kind of violent, vitriolic language.
I think we can all agree that the rise in threats to our MPs.
Absolutely disgraceful. And we've seen what this does. Look at the Roman
violent
Republic.
language is part of our discourse, but that there is a line which we need to get right. And the answer isn't to ban, the answer is to educate yourself as to what that line is.
Jess Phillips, go away and educate yourself. Demosthenes committed suicide. Cicero, Caesar was literally stabbed in the back in Parliament. And, some of the things that you're saying and doing, you stand up, you go, and you think that's good enough. It's not good enough. I don't care what side of the debate you're on.
And I think what we're trying to get back to is the sort
of... The other thing about Jess Phillips, I'm sorry, it's the smugness. It's like she's dimly aware that there might be people who disagree with her about things, that there might actually be two sides to these various debates, and that good people are on both sides with good arguments. But she doesn't have any good arguments, so she just covers her back by saying, the person arguing against me is a man, so obviously he's wrong. Or the person arguing has a certain education, or votes for a certain party. She's openly said that she was brought up to hate people who were on the other side. Well, that's great, isn't it? That's really healthy for political debate and all the things that she pretends to want. Calmness, compromise. this is how democracy falls.
You raise a point about how it is about the health of political
Jess
debate.
Phillips, and this is the other thing, right? She said, the thing about Boris Johnson that I can't stand is open ambition, right? And it's a perfectly legitimate point to make, and you go back to Cicero.
A lot of us might want to be Prime Minister. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, guess who's famously said that she's wanted to be Prime Minister since she went to that, let us remember, posh grammar school, a grammar school that her party would abolish, by the way. She just said that she wants to be Prime Minister. So how is that not ambition?
She has declared an interest in running for the leader of the Labour Party when inevitably...
Having literally stabbed Corbyn in the back.
Yeah, on the front.
Not literally. And in the front.
Yeah, not literally. So, yes, what we're trying to...
Let's move on from the... It's the other thing about Jess Phillips. Just the more I think about it, the more enraged I get.
You feel like Jess Phillips, like I feel about Cicero, but in the opposite way.
It's just unbelievable, and the unbelievable hubristic hypocrisy of standing there and saying that she wants to save democracy by not having a free and fair election and by countermanding a free and fair
We're getting dangerously middle. We will admit that we have listeners who I hope are still listening.
There are good arguments on both sides, but you paying Jess Phillips to stand up and say, is not one of them.
No, and we go back to this health of the political debate. Read Demosthenes, read Cicero, be a better parliament.
Jess Phillips, if you're listening, in the name of the gods, go at once.
I think we should probably...
I pour myself another whiskey and soda.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, all right, so let's go back to the classics here.
The actual Philippics as opposed to the Jess Philippics.
Yeah. Demosthenes versus Cicero. We need to, if you remember if you can remember the point of this podcast, which is not your political rambling.
We voted to leave. We haven't left. The rest is just noise. And what is the noise? Anyway, so this is the other thing, right? We're used to the good ending, the happy ending, right? And the thing that's so moving about Demosthenes and Cicero is they were trying to speak for the freedom of their people and the survival of democracy, or in the Roman case, a sort of mixed constitution, but a republic. And they failed. Yeah. Democracy in Greece was snuffed out because of the failure of the policies that Demosthenes wanted to persuade people to. It was snuffed out for 2,000 years, right? The republic in Rome was snuffed out for 2,000 years, basically until us Brits and Americans started to recreate the idea that you might actually want to vote for your leaders and that maybe votes counted.
And they've got into overdrive. They have a lot of elections. I mean,
okay,
I don't think most parliaments...
Yes, they're making up for lost time over in Italy.
Most Italian parliaments haven't lasted a year. They've had like 80 governments in the last 90 years.
But and these people, they paid with their lives for it. Martin Luther King, I still find it, and I practically... I find it hard not to cry when I listen to those Martin Luther King speeches, because they are so powerful, and because of the amazing moral force that he brought to bear, and he changed the world, and he died for it. He was killed for this, and he knew that he was putting himself in danger. His last speech, he says, "I may not make it there with you." If you're listening to this, go away and look at some of the Martin Luther King speeches. It is amazing. He says, "I'm not going to get to the promised land with you," because he knows that he's in serious risk, and sure enough, he's shot. So,
but the point of the podcast is that we are trying to select the 100 greatest books. Now, we are, and I need to do a running tally at some point, we're a bit of a problem because we voted for 4 a couple of episodes ago.
We're in trouble because of all those playwrights.
But who absolutely deserve a place. So the question is, how do these compare? And when I say these compare, that's Demosthenes and Cicero. Who are we going to keep?
So I'm going to say controversially. I mean, this stuff is great, and it's a good read, and I'd recommend people to go and read it. It's quite some of these speeches are quite short. For me, interestingly, discussing the modern speakers has brought it home to me the fact that we don't have recordings of it, and actually, because we've desperately got to make up some room here, and because we know we've got the information. It's really, for me, it's the story about Demosthenes and Cicero that's so powerful, and we've got that from other books that we might well keep, like Plutarch's Lives. So Plutarch compared the two. Right, he did a little biography of Demosthenes, a little biography of Cicero, and compared them. And he couldn't choose between them. He basically says, look, there are uncanny parallels between them. Right, so they're both physical weaklings who are not physically brave, although they became physically brave through their lives. They worked their way up through the law courts. They became great political figures from very genuinely obscure backgrounds. They both lost daughters. They were both driven out of their country into exile, but returned with honour, but then had to flee again and were either murdered or forced to commit suicide. He says there are differences between them.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're painting as if they're very similar characters, but actually, in temperament, they're quite different.
Quite different. And so, he says, look, Demosthenes' oratory, and this is true if you read them, you can see it. It's not embellished. It's not highfalutin. It's not literary. It's direct and forceful and persuasive. Cicero has a different style, which he describes as it's got the width of candlelight about it. In other words, you can tell that he's stayed up overnight and has been writing it and polishing it. It's more sophisticated. It's more humorous. Cicero uses jokes. He's an absolute joker.
Who's your daddy?
Yeah, someone says to him, meaning, you're not posh enough to be just count yourself among the great men. Who was your father?
Yeah.
And Cicero says, well, I can't ask you the same question basically because your mum put it about so much. It's not clear. A bit like your mum. We've said even his dying words were a sort of
joke. A sort of joke.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was very brave. That it reminded me of that guy. Do you remember that Italian guy recently, a couple of years ago, who was killed by Islamic extremists, and his last words were, "I'll show you how an Italian dies."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
No, very moving.
Yeah, very moving. And you kind of think, if I'm ever, God forbid, in that sort of situation, we should be thinking about everyone listening. Start thinking about your dying words now, because you do not want them to be. Whoa!
And make sure that someone records them, of course.
Yeah.
But Cicero, a joker, but also, and we've alluded to this. I mean, he's a hero of mine. But we're inviting him to the dinner party from beyond the grave. But we know he's just going to bang on and on about his own achievements.
Quite pleased with himself.
He is a boaster.
Yeah.
But I'm going to argue he's a more rounded figure. He's a lawyer, we've said, a public speaker of great note, we're still talking about now, but also a politician and a philosopher. And he held office.
Yeah.
He was a consul of Rome.
He's the bigger player, I think, isn't he? He's the more rounded. He brings more to the party.
He's also incredibly, his morals and virtues, despite the fact he's a bit of a coward and incredibly smug, he was not corrupt. He was motivated by a genuine belief in, essentially the divinity of the Republic. I'm not suggesting that Demosthenes was a corrupt character, but Cicero was less compromising politically, perhaps. Now, you might argue, is that a virtue?
Was that did that get him in trouble? Yeah.
I don't know, but I think it's certainly a difference between them.
Yeah.
It's hard.
So I think it's hard, but as I say, for me, the problem with these is, and this is why I'm afraid I'm not going to vote for either of them to go through. We know the story from other sources which might go through. I don't want to prejudge when we talk about Plutarch, but we don't have the delivery. And when you compare it to listening to the Churchill or to the Martin Luther King, I think the delivery is so important. As Demosthenes himself says, or when Cicero talks about tone, can we really judge it? Do we need the speeches? The text of the speeches themselves?
No, hold on. So
I'm not sure we do.
I'm going to disagree with you. I mean, I really want to hear a great actor perform these.
Yes.
Perhaps even maybe we look out. Maybe Audible actually has some.
I wonder who would you pick to do them? I mean, so Demosthenes, I think you want someone old and rugged. Ian McKellen, in his late era, McKellen would do a damn good job of this.
But then Cicero, obviously we've mentioned David Bamber's wonderful portrayal, but maybe also starring in I want Toby Menzies, Tobias Menzies. He's about to be in the Crown as Prince Philip. A good classically trained Shakespearean actor.
Right.
Is he too young? I suppose it depends what he
Depends what they
is.
do.
Cicero, we have so much of. We have early Cicero, we have mid Cicero. And
so maybe to the Cataline, what you could do it. But who would you do to do the Philippics?
Yeah, it's a hard one. But I mean, I'm going to disagree with you because I'm going to make an argument that it doesn't matter about the delivery of it. We have the text. They've come down to us. They have been so influential. People have recorded them in the words that we have. We see the power of them and we know that the effect they had on history. But essentially, we don't need to actually hear the delivery to know the delivery was effective because they achieved the end of rousing the people to their cause, although ultimately their cause has failed. So if I see where you're coming from, do we just need to know that they exist or do we need the actual text? I think we do need the actual text, but conscious that we are running out of room,
Oh, God.
I would be willing to, and I love Cicero, I would be willing to not take either of them into the Library 100 on the condition that we're essentially pre-approving Plutarch.
Right, yes, okay. I think we can agree on that.
Which keeps them.
But I'd be very interested to know what our listeners think about this. But I'd also be interested to know what the listeners think about modern...
Jess Phillips.
I
suspect we might get some
chat about this. And obviously Jess Phillips, if you're listening to this is not personal, and I wish you well. And by the way, any scumbags out there who make direct threats to politicians, which is something that Jess Phillips has spoken movingly about in the Commons recently, that is just so it's not just disgusting, it is so dangerous. If you look at first century Roman history, the moment when violence enters politics is the moment that politics is lost. Absolutely.
It is disgraceful.
We've talked about Churchill and Martin Luther King. Who else have we missed out? I'd be really interested in people saying, oh, you haven't, what about so-and-so, what about so-and-so? Who would you put in your sort of top 11 of great speakers of all time, men and women, from any country, any time of history? But we've clearly missed a lot, and I'd be really interested in people's ideas about that.
So we've already talked, we normally talk about shortcuts at the end, for people who haven't got the time, that you should make the effort, but they are quite long, these ones, to be fair, 14 speeches by Cicero. We've talked about Robert Harris's trilogy, please go and buy it. It's all great, easy good. The Rome TV series, we've mentioned a few times.
You have mentioned it. There's quite an obvious one you've missed, though. A chap called William Shakespeare, who you may have heard of, possibly one of his greatest history plays, certainly his greatest sort of ancient history play, Julius Caesar.
Well, we went to see it. In fact, I'm wearing the red baseball cap with Caesar written on it, which was a brilliant sort of
Make Rome Great Again.
Make Rome Great Again. A fantastic performance. It was actually the first play performed at the New British Theatre in London. And I battled through snow, if you remember. And all the trains coming out of Portsmouth were cancelled, and it was just like the last minute I managed to get there. And it was an amazing. It had Ben Whishaw in.
As Brutus.
And,
was it Fiona Shaw as Cassius?
And tremendous cast, brilliant production.
And it's something I've always wanted to see them do this, where they make the audience the crowd, mob, and you get caught up in the rhetoric, and you'll start cheering for Caesar, and then you're cheering for Mark Antony, and you're cheering for Brutus.
It was great done, but any performance by it is an amazing play.
And there is possibly the definitive film version still, even though it's black and white, but don't let that put you off, is the old 50s one with Marlon Brando. Yeah. Marlon Brando, the dangerous, sexy, young rebel without a cause, is acting as Mark Antony, and it's a brilliant bit of casting, it's a brilliant bit of method acting. That scene where Brutus sways the crowd one way and then Mark Antony comes and sways the crowd the other, using rhetoric, is absolutely magnificent. And someone, please, send a copy of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, put it in the post, send it to Jess Phillips, assuming that she hasn't deliberately forgotten how to read, because reading's not for people like her, and improve your technique.
Fully agree. Great stuff.
Excellent. Bloody Jess Phillips. Right, are you scripted up? Are you ready to go?
Where's my script?
Have you read it yet?
No.
Do you want me to? Fucking idiot.
Happy days.